The year was 1876, a time when the mountains still held their own counsel and the silence was a physical presence. For Elias Vance, that silence was both a refuge and a penance. He was a trapper, a man who had sought the harshest, most isolated corners of the Rockies to outrun a grief that had the weight and substance of a second shadow. The cold air of his small, meticulously kept cabin was thick with the ghosts of a wife's laughter and a son's first words, memories he polished with a loneliness so profound it had become the very architecture of his soul. His days were a litany of simple, hard tasks. He checked his trap lines, the snap of steel, a stark punctuation in the vast quiet. He skinned his catch with an efficiency that was mechanical, his hands moving with a memory of their own, allowing his mind to remain a still, frozen lake. He tanned the hides, the acrid scent of the chemicals, a familiar sting that grounded him in the present, pulling him back from the undertow of the past. He had come here, to this high, unforgiving country, after the fever had taken his Abigail and their boy, Caleb, within a week of each other. The world of towns and people, with its easy comforts and casual cruelties, had become unbearable. Here, the sorrow was at least honest. The wind that tore at the pines sounded like a thing grieving, and in its howl, Elias felt a sliver of kinship. His life was a spare, brutalist poem written in solitude. He spoke to no one, saw no one for months at a time. The only sound he ever made, other than the necessary noises of survival, was a hum. It was a simple, unadorned folk melody, a tune Abigail had sung to lull their son to sleep. It was a river song, about water finding its way over stone and through darkness, forever seeking the sea. For Elias, to hum it was to hold a shard of his former life, sharp enough to hurt, but too precious to let go. He never sang the words. The words belonged to her, and his voice felt like a trespasser in their sacred space. One afternoon, while checking a line in a box canyon miles from his cabin, he felt a change in the air. It was a stillness that was different from the usual quieter held breath. He moved with the practiced stealth of a man who lives among predators, his rifle held loosely at his side. Peering through a thicket of aspen, he saw them. A large encampment of Cheyenne, their lodges arranged in a solemn circle. This was not a war party or a hunting group. The mood was too heavy, too funereal. Smoke curled from a central fire, but there was none of the usual camp noise, no laughter, no children playing, no dogs barking. There was only a low, collective murmur of sorrow. His instinct, honed by years of isolation, screamed at him to retreat. He was a white man, an intruder in a moment of private, tribal pain. To be discovered here could be a death sentence. Yet he remained, frozen in place. In the center of the camp, before the largest lodge, he could see a figure lying on a pallet of buffalo robes. An old man, his chest bare and his face etched with the deep lines of a long and formidable life. Warriors, their faces painted in subdued colors of mourning, stood vigil. Women knelt nearby, their heads bowed. This was a chief, and he was dying. Elias felt an unwelcome and powerful pull of recognition. The scene resonated with a frequency he knew in his bones, the quiet, desperate vigil at the edge of life's end. He saw their powerlessness in the face of the inevitable, and it was a mirror to the helplessness that had shattered his own world. He should have left. Every rational part of his mind knew it. But his feet were rooted to the spot, held fast by a current of shared humanity that was stronger than his fear. As he watched, a tall warrior, his expression a mask of strained composure, turned, and his eyes met Elias's across the clearing. The moment stretched, thin and taut as a bowstring. There was no time to run. The warrior, Honyahaka, son of the chief, strode towards him. He moved with a liquid grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. Elias did not raise his rifle. He stood his ground, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He had nothing to offer, nothing to defend but his own lonely existence. Honyahaka stopped 10 feet away, his dark eyes sweeping over Elias, taking in the worn buckskins, the gaunt face, the profound weariness in his posture. He saw not a threat, but a man as weathered and solitary as a lone pine on a high ridge. Silence hung between them, thick with suspicion and unspoken questions. Elias, in a gesture he didn't fully understand himself, slowly unslung the canteen from his shoulder and held it out. It was a simple offering, water, the currency of life in this hard land. Honyahaka's eyes flickered to the canteen, then back to Elias's face. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod, not of acceptance, but of acknowledgement. He did not take the water. Instead, he gestured with his chin back toward the camp. It was not a command, but it was not an invitation either. It was a complex statement. You are seen, you are an outsider, but for now, you may remain. Elias lowered his canteen, his arm trembling slightly. He understood. He was being allowed to bear witness. He retreated to the edge of the clearing, finding a place among the shadows of the pines, and settled in for a long vigil. The sun bled across the sky, bruising it into the deep purples and oranges of dusk. The air grew colder. The low chanting from the camp began, a rhythmic, mournful sound that seemed to pull the darkness closer. Elias watched as the medicine man performed his rites, his movements ancient and filled with a desperate hope. He saw Honyahaka kneel by his father's side, his stoicism finally cracking as he placed a hand on the old man's chest. The night deepened, becoming a vast, star-dusted cathedral of sorrow. The chief's breaths grew ragged, each one a struggle, a fight the old warrior was slowly losing. Elias felt the familiar chill of impending loss creep into his own heart, a phantom limb aching with a remembered pain. He saw his own face in Honyahaka's. He saw Abigail's weakening form in the chief's. The grief he had so carefully walled off for years breached its dam, flooding him with an empathy so overwhelming it left him breathless. And without conscious thought, the hum began in his chest. It rose to his throat, and for the first time since the fever, the words followed, whispered into the cold night air. "Oh, the river, it runs to the sea," he sang, his voice raspy from disuse, yet clear in the profound stillness. "Through the valley, for you and for me." It was Abigail's song, a lullaby for a dying child, a hymn of gentle passage for a fading spirit. The chanting around the fire faltered, then stopped. Every head in the Cheyenne camp turned towards the tree line, towards the source of the strange, soft melody. Honyahaka looked up, his face a mixture of shock and bewilderment. Elias didn't stop. He couldn't. The song was a current, and he was caught in it. It flows through the dark and the stone. You are never, no, never alone. He sang of a journey, not an end. He sang of peace, not of struggle. He laid the most sacred, painful piece of his heart bare for these strangers to see. He sang for the dying chief, Vokin. He sang for Caleb. He sang for Abigail. He sang until the song was done, the last note hanging in the air like a ghost before being absorbed by the immense silence of the mountains. In the quiet that followed, a change occurred. The chief's ragged breathing eased, a look of profound peace settled over his ancient features. He took one more long, gentle breath, and then was still. Vokin, the great chief of the Cheyenne, had completed his journey. Honyahaka looked from his father's serene face to the shadows where the white man hid, a look of awe and reverence dawning in his eyes. Elias, feeling as though he had given up a part of his own spirit, quietly melted back into the forest and made the long, weary trek to his cabin, leaving the Cheyenne to their grief and the dawn to its slow arrival. He fell into his cot fully clothed, an exhaustion deeper than any he had ever known pulling him into a dark, dreamless sleep. He slept through the dawn and into the full light of morning, waking only when he sensed a profound shift in his world. The usual morning sounds, the chatter of a squirrel, the distant call of a hawk were gone. An absolute, pressing silence surrounded his cabin. It was the silence of 100 held breaths. Elias rose slowly, his body aching. He moved to the single small window, his heart beginning a slow, heavy drumbeat of dread. He pulled back the corner of the worn burlap curtain and looked out. And his world stopped. They were there. The entire Cheyenne nation, it seemed. Warriors stood in silent, ordered ranks, their lances and bows held at rest. Behind them were the women, the children, the elders. They formed a vast, silent sea of humanity that stretched from the edge of his clearing back into the trees. They were not painted for war. Their faces were solemn, patient, watchful. They were not besieging his cabin, they were holding vigil. 800 people, their collective gaze fixed on his small, lonely dwelling. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through him. This was it. They had come for him. Perhaps the song was an offense, a blasphemy. Perhaps his presence at their chief's death was a trespass that could only be paid for with his life. He was trapped, one man against a nation. His rifle was by the door, but it was a useless stick against such a number. He was a dead man. His isolation, the fortress he had built for himself, had been shattered, and now the world was flooding in to claim him. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, the silence outside a crushing weight. He could not run, could not hide. He could only wait. Finally, a single figure detached himself from the front rank and began to walk towards the cabin. It was Honyahaka. He moved not with menace, but with a deliberate, formal grace. He carried no weapon in his hands. He stopped before the door and waited. Elias's mind raced. He could stay inside, a coward in his wooden tomb, or he could face his end with what little dignity he had left. He thought of Abigail, of the courage with which she had faced her end. He thought of his son. He would not die cowering in the dark. Taking a deep, ragged breath, he unlatched the door and stepped out into the blinding light, blinking against the sun and the overwhelming sight of the waiting tribe. Honyahaka stood before him, his face a study in deep, solemn emotion. He looked at Elias, his gaze direct and filled with an intensity that went beyond mere language. Then he spoke, his voice low and clear, using the few halting English words he knew, supplemented by the elegant, expressive signs of his people. The song, he said, his hand gesturing first to the sky, to the spirit world, and then to his own heart. For my father. He pointed back towards the camp, a place Elias could no longer see. He traveled, on the song. His hands made a motion like a smoothly flowing river. Peace. His spirit has peace. Elias stared, his mind struggling to comprehend. This wasn't an execution, this wasn't vengeance, it was something else entirely. Honyahaka took a step closer, his eyes pleading. The farewell song, the spirit song, it is good medicine. He gestured to the silent, waiting nation behind him. My people, we must know the words, we must learn the song. For Vokin, and for all who will travel after him. He looked directly into Elias's eyes, the unspoken question hanging between them, heavier than any threat. You will teach us. The request was staggering. It was an invasion far more profound than any physical attack. They wanted him to take the most private artifact of his heart, the last pure memory of his wife and child, and share it. To give it away. The song was his alone. It was the hymn of his personal church of sorrow. To teach it would be to unlock the door to that sanctuary and let the entire world in. It would mean singing it again and again, feeling the sharp edge of its grief with every note, every word, until it was no longer his. He looked past Honyahaka, at the hundreds of faces watching him. He saw stoic warriors, their eyes holding a raw, fresh grief. He saw mothers clutching their children, their expressions a mixture of sorrow and hope. He saw old men whose faces were maps of a life lived, now contemplating their own final journey. He did not see a threat. He saw a people drowning in the same ocean of loss that he had been adrift in for years. They were not asking to take his pain, but to share it, to transform a personal lullaby into a communal anthem of remembrance. In that moment, Elias Vance understood. His grief was not a fortress to be defended, it was a bridge. His song was not a relic to be hidden away, it was a gift to be given. To refuse would be to deny them the peace it had brought their chief, and to deny himself the first real human connection he had been offered in years. It was a choice between the cold, dead safety of his past and the terrifying, vibrant possibility of a shared present. He took a long, shuddering breath, the clean mountain air filling his lungs. He looked at Honyahaka and gave a slow, deliberate nod. A quiet sigh, a collective exhalation of relief, passed through the assembled tribe. Elias cleared his throat, which felt tight with unshed tears. He stood straight before the 800 waiting souls, and he began. "Oh, the river," he sang, his voice trembling at first, but gaining strength with each word. "It runs to the sea." He sang the first line, and then he paused, motioning with his hand. After a moment of hesitation, a few voices tried to mimic the sounds, then a few more. Honyahaka's rich baritone joined in, strong and clear. Soon, a chorus of voices, awkward and uncertain, rose to repeat the phrase. He sang the next line, "Through the valley, for you and for me." Again he waited, and again they sang it back to him. 800 voices, learning a melody of loss and release. The sound was strange, haunting, and impossibly beautiful. It echoed from the canyon walls, a testament to a moment that should never have happened, a connection forged between two worlds by a simple, sad song. For 3 days, Elias taught them. He broke the song down line by line, word by word. He walked among them, correcting pronunciation, humming the melody for small groups of children, his initial terror replaced by a sense of profound, surreal purpose. He shared his meager rations with them, and in return they brought him roasted venison and flatbread. He learned Honyahaka's name, and the Cheyenne learned his. They did not speak much, for they had no real common language. They had something more fundamental. They had the song. On the morning of the 4th day they were ready. Honyahaka gave a signal, and the entire tribe faced the east, towards the rising sun. Then, as one, they began to sing. The harmony was imperfect, the English words shaped by a foreign tongue, but the emotion was pure. 800 voices sang Abigail's lullaby to the mountains, a final, powerful farewell to their fallen chief. Elias stood apart, listening, and felt the tight, cold knot of his own grief begin to dissolve, not vanishing, but loosening, its bitter concentration diluted in that great chorus of shared humanity. He was no longer singing alone. When the song was finished, a peaceful silence settled over the valley. The Cheyenne began to quietly and efficiently break down their camp. Honyahaka approached Elias one last time. He placed a hand over his own heart, then extended it to Elias, a gesture of deep respect and gratitude. In his other hand, he held a magnificent buffalo robe, its hide painted with the story of Vokin's life. He laid it gently over Elias's shoulders. "Elias Vance," Honyahaka said, the name sounding strange and important in his mouth. "Your song is now our song. You are not forgotten." And with that, they left. The great sea of people flowed back into the forest, as quietly as they had arrived, their soft footfalls leaving little trace on the land. But their presence had left an indelible mark on him. Elias returned to his cabin. The silence that greeted him was different now. It was not the oppressive, empty silence of loneliness. It was a restful, contemplative quiet, filled with the echo of 800 voices. The cabin no longer felt like a tomb for his memories, but a place where a profound act of living had occurred. Months later, as the first snows of winter began to dust the peaks, Elias stood outside his door, the painted buffalo robe wrapped around him. The wind soughed through the pines, and for a moment he thought he could hear a faint, distant melody carried on the breeze. He smiled, a small, unfamiliar feeling on his face. He began to hum the river song, and then, his voice soft but steady, he sang the words. They were still his, and they were still Abigail's. But now they belonged to the mountains, too. His grief was no longer a weight that held him down. It was a song, and he had learned, at last, how to let it fly. He was still a man of the wilderness, but he was no longer a man alone.